You either start covering more of our expenses, or I'm done pretending this is a partnership. She said it casually, standing in the kitchen with her phone in one hand, like she was reading off a grocery list. No anger, no discussion, just a line in the sand. I remember nodding once, mostly to keep the moment from turning into something louder. We'd been living together for almost 2 years, sharing a small apartment and a joint checking account we used for rent, utilities, groceries. I paid most of it, but we called it shared finances because that sounded adult. I didn't mind being the steady one. I made more, I planned better, and I liked knowing bills were covered. The ultimatum wasn't about survival. Rent was paid. The lights were on. It was about expectations shifting without my consent. Within a week of that conversation, I found the second problem by accident. I was paying a credit card from our shared account when I noticed a charge that didn't make sense. Then another. Then several more, spread over months. Online shopping, travel bookings, payments to cards I didn't recognize. When I asked her about it, she shrugged and said, "Oh, those are just things I'm handling. It's not a big deal." It was a big deal because none of it had ever come up before. We'd agreed early on that anything over a few $100s would be talked through. That rule had apparently expired without notice. I logged into the budgeting app we'd set up together. Half the categories were blown out. There were balances I'd never seen. One card was nearly maxed. Another was already past due. She didn't deny it. She just reframed it. "You're better with money," she said. "That's why it makes sense for you to carry more. I'll catch up." But the math didn't support the promise. Her income hadn't changed. The spending had. And the pressure she put on me to step up came right after she'd quietly stepped far past what we agreed on. Over the next few weeks, the pattern got clearer. She started forwarding bills to me instead of paying them herself. If I hesitated, she'd sigh and say I was making things stressful. When I brought up the debt again, she accused me of micromanaging. One night she laughed and said, "This is what being in a real relationship looks like. Someone has to be the safety net." It wasn't a conversation, it was a justification. I stopped using the joint account except for rent. That's when she noticed. She asked why groceries were bouncing. I told her I was tightening things up until we had a plan. She rolled her eyes. "So you're punishing me now?" That word stuck with me, punishing, as if refusing to absorb hidden debt was some kind of control tactic. I asked her to sit down and list everything. Cards, balances, monthly payments. She said she didn't have time and that I was being dramatic. Then she reminded me again that I made more money. The disrespect wasn't loud, it was efficient. My role had been quietly redefined as financial buffer, and when I didn't comply fast enough, the ultimatum came back. "If this is how you're going to be," she said, "maybe we're not compatible." There it was again, the threat without calling it a threat. Pay more or accept instability. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just started paying closer attention. I noticed how often packages arrived that weren't necessities. How she talked about future trips while dodging present bills. How every solution involved me extending myself further while she promised vague improvement later. The trust eroded fast once I stopped filling the gaps automatically. I wasn't angry yet. Mostly I felt tired. Tired of discovering things after the fact. Tired of being cast as unreasonable for wanting transparency. The final moment in that stretch came when she casually asked if I could co-sign a personal loan just to consolidate some stuff. She said it like she was asking me to pick up milk. I said no. She stared at me like I'd insulted her. "So you're okay letting me drown?" That question told me everything. Her hidden spending had turned into expectation. Her expectation had turned into pressure. And the pressure was now framed as my responsibility. That night, I slept on the couch. Not because we fought, but because there was nothing left to say. I lay there listening to the hum of the fridge, thinking about how quietly things had shifted and how little space there was for it to shift back. By morning, I knew this wasn't a rough patch. It was a system that depended on me staying silent and solvent, and I knew systems like that don't fix themselves. The next morning, she acted like nothing had happened. She made coffee, asked about my day, mentioned a show she wanted to watch later. The couch conversation, the loan request, the tension, all of it was treated like background noise. That night, I tried one last time to talk it through. I asked her to sit down and actually look at the numbers with me. I kept it practical. No accusations, just facts. She didn't even look at the screen. I don't need a spreadsheet to know I'm stressed, she said. And honestly, you dragging this out is making it worse. I asked her what her plan was. Not someday, not eventually, a real plan. She crossed her arms and said, my plan was us. But if you're going to nickel and dime me, then maybe I misjudged how supportive you are. That was the moment it clicked. The ultimatum wasn't frustration, it was leverage. The hidden spending wasn't a mistake. It was an assumption that I'd cover it once it surfaced. I told her I wasn't comfortable being financially responsible for debt I didn't agree to or even know about. I said it calmly, slowly, like I was explaining a policy. She laughed and shook her head. Wow, so this is who you are when things get hard. Then she doubled down. She said couples help each other. She said my savings meant I could handle it. She said her debt wasn't real debt because it was for experiences and work clothes and things that made her feel like herself. She said if I loved her, I wouldn't be drawing lines over money. I realized I wasn't being asked to help. I was being told to absorb. That night, I moved my paycheck to a separate account. I didn't announce it. I didn't hide it either. I just stopped feeding the joint pool beyond my share of rent. She noticed within days. First came irritation, then guilt, then anger. She accused me of abandoning her while still living under the same roof. She said I was creating instability. She told a friend on speakerphone that I was financially controlling. I didn't respond. I kept paying my portion of rent and utilities. I stopped covering groceries, subscriptions, and random charges that weren't mine. The escalation came when the joint account dipped too low to cover a minimum payment on one of her cards. She confronted me in the hallway and said, "So you're really going to let this happen?" I told her I wasn't stopping her from paying anything. I was just not paying it for her. She said I was being cruel. She said I was proving I didn't care. Then she said the line she must have been saving. "If you don't step up right now," she said, "I don't see how we stay together." It wasn't shouted, it was delivered like a final offer. I looked at her and felt nothing sharp, just clarity. I told her I wasn't stepping into debt that wasn't mine. I said I wouldn't co-sign, consolidate, or cover balances I hadn't agreed to. She stared at me for a long second, then said, "Fine, then I guess I know where I stand." I nodded and said, "Yeah, me too." That weekend I packed my things. I didn't rush, but I didn't linger. Clothes, documents, personal items, everything I needed fit into my car. She watched from the doorway, waiting for a reaction, waiting for panic, waiting for me to backpedal. Instead, I told her I'd keep paying my share of rent until the lease was up, just like we'd agreed when we moved in. Nothing more, nothing less. Her expression changed then. Not sadness, calculation. The first real consequence hit 2 weeks later. One of her cards froze due to non-payment. A subscription she used for work got suspended. She asked if I could just float her until things settled. I said no. I moved out fully by the end of the month. New place, new account, clean separation. The silence afterward wasn't dramatic. It was empty. And for the first time in a long while, that emptiness felt stable. Final update. After I moved out, things unraveled faster than I expected, and none of it required my input. The system she leaned on quietly stopped holding. The joint account stayed open only long enough to finish the lease payments I'd committed to. Without my deposits, it never recovered. Automatic payments failed one by one. She texted once asking if something was wrong with the bank. I didn't respond. Within a month, she had to downgrade her phone plan. Then she missed a rent-adjacent utility payment tied to her name, which flagged her account. Nothing catastrophic, just friction. Late fees, hold music, emails she couldn't ignore. I heard about most of it indirectly. Mutual friends asked if we were working things out. One mentioned she'd picked up extra shifts and was stressed all the time. Another said she was talking about moving back in with a roommate to save money. The hidden debt didn't disappear just because I did. Interest stacked. Minimums climbed. The cards she'd called not real debt became very real when her available credit vanished. She reached out twice more. The first message was neutral, just checking in. The second was practical. She asked if I'd reconsider co-signing a consolidation loan since we were still on good terms. I didn't reply to either. Without a buffer, her spending habits collided with fixed reality. Trips got canceled. A weekend getaway she'd talked about for months fell through when a payment bounced. She vented online about how expensive everything had become lately. What changed most wasn't her lifestyle. It was how people around her responded. Friends stopped assuming I'd cover gaps. Her parents asked questions she didn't like answering. Co-workers noticed she was distracted and tense. I wasn't there to absorb the overflow anymore, so the overflow stayed visible. By the time the lease ended, she'd already moved into a smaller place with someone else. I transferred my final payment and closed the account the same day. No message attached. She tried once more to frame it emotionally. She said she never expected money to come between us. She said relationships weren't supposed to feel like contracts. I read it, then archived it. From my side, things were quiet. My expenses dropped. My savings stabilized. I didn't feel rich or victorious. I just felt accurate. Every dollar went where I intended it to go. The strangest part was how quickly the anxiety left once I wasn't managing someone else's chaos. No more surprise charges. No more vague promises. No more ultimatums disguised as partnership. I ran into her a few months later at a grocery store. She looked tired, not broken, just worn down in a way I recognized. We exchanged polite hellos, nothing else. As I walked away, I realized there was no resentment left, just distance. I didn't punish her. I didn't expose her. I didn't lecture or warn anyone. I simply stopped being the system that kept her choices from touching the ground. And once I did, gravity handled the rest.